what this legislation will do. It'll strengthen and streamline coordination among the governments of the United States, Angola, Botswana, and Namibia, as well as non-governmental organizations in the private sector to protect the basin there. Second, it's going to prioritize wildlife trafficking and anti-poaching programs in the greater region to help save elephants and other endangered species. And lastly, it will promote sound economic growth for local communities through responsible natural resource management. So I want to thank the International Conservation Caucus co-chair, Representative Jeff Fortenberry, and this committee's ranking member, Mr. Engel, for partnering with me on this measure. And I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Engel, for his remarks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this markup of H.R. 4819, the Delta Act. I'd like to also begin by thanking Mr. Fortenberry of Nebraska, a former member of this committee, for his initiative in putting forward this legislation. And as I mentioned before, I'd like to commend you, Mr. Chairman, for your extraordinary leadership on international conservation issues, and particularly the fight against wildlife trafficking for many, many years. So thank you for what you've done. The Okavango River Basin in Angola, Botswana, and Namibia supports an amazing array of wildlife, including the largest remaining concentration of elephants in Africa. It is also home to more than 1 million people. This important legislation requires the development of a strategy to encourage the sustainable management of natural resources in the river basin, including the protection of wildlife. This strategy will require input from a wide range of stakeholders, including national governments, local communities, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector. The goal here is to support economic development for the residents of the region while preserving unique ecosystems and protecting wildlife. I'd also like to highlight that the Delta Act has the support of key wildlife associations, including the Wildlife Conservation Society, based in my hometown of Bronx, New York, and we did hear Dr. Bennett, who is from the Wildlife Conservation Society. Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor of this important legislation, and I urge all of our colleagues to support it. I yield back.
Do any other members seek recognition to speak on this measure? Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Over the decades, it has become apparent that conservation efforts must be transboundary and engage entire regions to advance sustainable solutions. Endangered and threatened species, natural landscapes, and poaching networks do not know national boundaries. This requires governments and conservation partners to share real-time information, move freely across transnational boundaries, and coordinate park protection responsibilities. These complex arrangements must be outlined in intergovernmental agreements to equitably share resource protection and benefits. As with our national parks, regional cooperation can better facilitate economic development through developing infrastructure and a tourism economy. Therefore, I strongly commend Jeff Fortenberry for authoring H.R. 4819, the Delta Act, and you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing it and the ranking member before the committee today, which would encourage this kind of transboundary coordination between Angola, Botswana, and Namibia, and the greater Okavango River Basin. I yield back to bounds.
Any other members seeking time? If not, yeah, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr.
Joe Wilson of South Carolina.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you definitely want to recognize me because I want to begin by thanking you and Ranking Member Elliott Engel to work with Congressman Jeff Fortenberry for providing the Defending Economic Livelihoods and Threatened Animals Act, also known as the Delta Act, before the committee. The Okavango is the fourth largest river system in southern Africa and has no outlet to the sea. Instead, the water empties into a land that flourishes with wildlife. The same river supports over 1 million people, potentially creating a potential long-term tug-of-war for the resources of the Delta. Water resource management has become an increasing concern in the region, such as in Cape Town, South Africa, where the infamous 0 day, or the day when the taps run dry, was projected to strike earlier this month, but has been delayed to next year. This act promotes technical assistance through sound water management that is both safe for the environment and wildlife, but also aligns with a developing human population. In the long run, this modest level of coordination helps ensure that countries interconnected by the Okavango River Basin will continue to remain stable and democracies. The Delta Act encourages transborder cooperation among Botswana, Angola, Namibia, and others in order to develop law enforcement and park ranger capabilities, which will deter criminals and terrorist organizations from poaching and smuggling. Being National Park Ranger in Africa is not a safe occupation. On May the 11th, a 25-year-old park ranger in the Democratic Republic of Congo named Rachel Masika Barak was killed while protecting tourists from abduction. She was the 8th park ranger killed this year. Though this park is much further north of Botswana, continued cooperation can help ensure that the Okavango remains peaceful. This bill acknowledges the opportunity and value provided by coordinating the private sector, donors, and non-governmental organizations with governmental institutions and advancing conservation efforts through public-private partnerships. I'm pleased to support and co-sponsor H.R. 4819, the Delta Act, and urge its passage, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. Any other members seeking time? Hearing no, or anyone seeking an amendment? Hearing no amendments, the chair now moves that the committee agree to H.R. 4819 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The measure is agreed to. Without objection, 4819 is ordered favorably reported in the form of a single amendment in the nature of a substitute. Staff is directed to make any technical and conforming changes, and the chair is authorized to seek House consideration under suspension of the rules. So let me end by thanking all the members for their participation today. This markup is adjourned.